So let's begin today's event with a brief learning. Again, there's a brief learning on the principle of impartiality, and then we're going to have a discussion. This series is part of PHAP's online learning series on humanitarian law and policy. For those of you who are PHAP members and are participating in the association's continuing learning credits program, please watch the screen and listen for the numerical code, which I will give you at the end of the session. You'll need this code to access the assessment and then to earn your credit for the session. Finally, what are the learning objectives today? Well, just basically, let's try and understand the core principle of humanity, both in its definition and its implementation. And I think what's going to help us do that is gaining knowledge of examples of the practical implications of impartiality, and really having a better understanding of the challenges in the real world of translating this principle into operations. And finally, we want, I think our speaker is from the ICRC, and so we hope that you'll gain a familiarity with the role impartiality plays within the Red Cross Red Crescent movement as both a goal and as a tool. So to help accomplish these objectives today, it's my great pleasure to introduce our guest expert for this presentation, Jeremy Labbé. Jeremy works at the ICRC in Geneva. He's the head of project for a project called Principles Guiding Humanitarian Action. Jeremy started his humanitarian career with the ICRC. He's worked both in headquarters in the field, and he also spent some time at the International Peace Institute. One particular point of focus of Jeremy's work has been the adaptation of the international humanitarian system to a changing world, and hence the relevance of the humanitarian principles. I think that's a great place to start for this discussion on impartiality. Welcome, Jeremy, and over to you.
Very much, Mark, for this introduction. I hope that everybody can hear me properly. Let me apologize in the first place for my strong French accent. I hope it will not be a disturbance or a problem for you to understand. I must also say that I'm very glad to be back on this PHAP platform. Indeed, I participated earlier this year to such a webinar on neutrality, and I'm very glad to be back here to discuss about impartiality this time, probably an even more fundamental principle than neutrality, but we'll get back to this. So I see that my presentation is uploaded, so I guess that we can get started. Maybe within the 15 to 20 minutes allotted to me, I would like to come back first on the definition of impartiality, what we mean with this principle. I know that it was tackled already a few weeks back by Mark when you did this webinar on the 4 humanitarian principles. But still, I think it is worth to get back to this. Then second, I will look at what I call the operationalization of impartiality. And here I would like to focus more on what it means in practice and how the ICRC sees this principle of impartiality and uses it and implement it in its practice. And last, I will touch upon some of the concrete challenges to impartiality before sharing with you a few conclusions. So let's get starting with the definition. Let me check if this works. Yes. So maybe before getting into the definition, a very quick historical overview of impartiality in modern humanitarianism. As most of you know, and as Mark mentioned it a few weeks back, I think this notion of impartiality, this principle of impartiality, can be traced back to 1859 and the Battle of Solferino, which is at the origin of the Red Cross. I don't want to go through history of the Red Cross, but just to emphasize that in essence, this idea of impartiality, and we'll get back to what impartiality means, but was there on the battlefield of Solferino in 1859 when Henri Dunant, the founder of the Red Cross, saw the scale of destruction and decided to mobilize volunteers in neighboring villages in Solferino, in this little town in northern Italy, to provide aid to all the wounded soldiers on the battlefield, regardless of the side they belong to. And in the ensuing years, the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement and the ICRC in the first place have tried to formalize the principles guiding our action on several occasions, and impartiality always came back as this guiding principle throughout. But it's not until 1965 in Vienna at the 20th International Conference of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement that the principle of impartiality was formalized as we know it today. And here I get to the definition that you see on your screen in front of you. You can see two different definitions. One is the one on top is the Red Cross, Red Crescent definition. This definition adopted 50 years ago, and I emphasize here that I seize this opportunity to stress that we celebrate this year the 50th anniversary of the adoption of those fundamental principles. And then but this definition developed 50 years ago was also largely influenced the broader humanitarian sector. And indeed, we saw the notion and the principle of impartiality appear in UN General Assembly Resolution 46182 adopted in 1991. It was used again in the Code of Conduct for international non-governmental organizations and the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement in disaster relief, in the sphere guidelines, and so on and so forth. So the definition, the Red Cross, Red Crescent definition is that the movement makes no discrimination as to nationality, race, religious beliefs, class, or political opinions. It endeavors to relieve the suffering of individuals, being guided solely by their needs and to give priority to the most urgent cases of distress. And then if you look at the OCHA definition, what you might notice is that, well, this is basically very similar. And there are two main components in the definition of impartiality on which we should come back, which is this non-discrimination aspect and the needs-based aspect. But we will get back to this. Maybe one difference that you might have seen here, if you look carefully at those two definitions, is that gender doesn't appear in the Red Cross, Red Crescent definition. But needless to say that it is indeed considered as I mean, we shouldn't do any arbitrary discrimination based on gender, but we will see later on that, however, the specific vulnerabilities linked to the gender must be considered and addressed in light of the principle of impartiality. But we will get back to this. Now, I'd like to talk briefly about those fundamental principles of the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement that were adopted 50 years ago, just to emphasize the place that impartiality has within those principles. And here I hope that I will not confuse anybody, because when we talk about the fundamental principles of the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, we talk about 7 principles. When we talk about the humanitarian principles that the broader humanitarian sector has broadly embraced, we talk about the first 4 principles of humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence. But obviously in this discussion, I will talk about impartiality the way we understand it within the ICRC and the Red Cross movement. So what I want to show here with this pyramid is that impartiality is part of a broader set of principles that do not all have the same value and the same finality, let's put it that way. Impartiality in our view, directly flows from this overarching principle of humanity that drive humanitarian action, and which was discussed at length last week with Hugo Slim. So impartiality flows from humanity because this is this idea of non-discrimination between human beings that is embodied in this principle of impartiality. And this is why we consider that those two principles of humanity and impartiality belong to the domain of goals. Those two principles are an end in itself. This is really what drives humanitarian action, as opposed to the principles of neutrality and independence, which we see as more operational principles. Those are tools that that enable us to deliver impartial humanitarian action, even in the most adverse and polarized circumstances of conflict. Which doesn't make them less important, but simply they have a different finality or a different function. And then we will not talk too much about the last three principles of voluntary service, unity, and universality, because these are specific to the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement. Yet, I would like to make just one point about these principles, is that in this Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, some of the participants to this webinar belong to this movement. Those three principles that belong to the organizational field are what give the institutional foundations to the movement and to the different entities of the movement: Red Cross, Red Crescent National Societies, the ICRC, the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, to develop an impartial, neutral, and independent humanitarian action. And for instance, unity, which says that all national societies should be one per state, should cover the entire territory of this state, and should be open to all within that state, meaning to all ethnicities, all religions, all political sensibilities, is critical to enable those national societies to deliver impartial aid throughout a given territory. Now, let's move on to the two main aspects of impartiality. Basically, we can see in this, as I already mentioned, there are two different sub-principles within this principle of impartiality. One is non-discrimination. This is this part that flows directly from the principle of humanity. No discrimination as to nationality, race, religious beliefs, class, gender, political opinions. It belongs to the domain of goals, properly speaking, as I already mentioned before. But the other aspect of impartiality is this idea of proportionality, which is this the fact that humanitarian action should be guided solely by the needs of affected people, and we should give priority to the most urgent or the most severe cases of distress. So here we are already entering in the domain of tools somehow, because indeed this with those two aspects, those two components, impartiality, the principle of impartiality recognizes that even though organizations want to address, humanitarian organizations want to address needs without any discrimination, not any single organization is in a position to do that in a comprehensive manner due to limited resources, limited human resources, financial resources, limited skills at times. And therefore, there must be a way to discriminate, since we can hardly cover all needs. And the way to discriminate is through an objective assessment of needs. So regardless of nationality, race, religious beliefs, and so on and so forth, but really just based on the severity and the urgency of needs. It is in that way that we enter here into the domain of tools. maybe one last thing that we have that is important to mention under the definition of impartiality is that impartiality is enshrined and enshrined in international humanitarian law. Indeed, as early as 1949, when this principle of impartiality wasn't even formally defined, since it was only defined in 1965, I mentioned it before, the Geneva Conventions were already recognizing this character to humanitarian action. And here I'm reading this Article 3 of the common to the 4 Geneva Conventions, which says that an impartial humanitarian body, such as the International Committee of the Red Cross, may offer its services to the parties to the conflict. Later on, in 1977, the centrality of impartiality was confirmed again through the additional protocols to the Geneva Convention. And here I'm reading again Article 70 of the first additional protocol, which says that relief actions which are humanitarian and impartial in character and conducted without any adverse distinctions should be undertaken subject to the agreement of the parties concerned in such relief actions. What is important to remember here is that impartiality is basically not an option for humanitarian organizations. It is what makes humanitarian action acceptable to states in situations of conflict. And this is, we can argue that this is probably the very condition why they accepted that, that they should consider seriously offer of services of humanitarian organizations that are impartial, and that they should facilitate this aid and shouldn't consider it as an interference with their internal affairs or with the politics of a given conflict. So impartiality is critical for humanitarian action, and it's not really an option, but it is part and parcel of what humanitarian action is. Now, I would like to move on to the operationalization of impartiality. And first, maybe look at impartiality at 3 different levels. Indeed, we can, as I said, this notion of impartiality is to deliver, means to deliver aid based on needs only, deliver aid without any discrimination to affected people. But we can look at this, this principle at 3 different levels. At the macro level, which is the ability of humanitarian organizations to cover needs at the global level, to address needs coming from emerging crises, but also not to forget needs coming from arising from so-called forgotten conflicts. And there is this notion that the global humanitarian systems or all humanitarian actors should collectively be able to address those needs impartially at the macro level wherever they are. Then you can look at impartiality at the crisis level or the country level, and which is the ability to address the most urgent needs in a given crisis, which might include, in a situation of conflict, to be able to access and to deliver aid to those affected communities that might be on the other side of a front line, that might be in an area controlled by a rebel group. And this is where really the principles of independence and neutrality that will be discussed in future webinars are really getting into the picture and are of paramount importance in order to navigate those complex circumstances and to be accepted by all parties in a given conflict, to cross lines in order to deliver impartial aid to the most vulnerable communities and people across the different front lines in a given context. And then at the micro level, and I would argue that this is really the bottom line of what we should understand by humanitarian action. At the micro level, every organization should be non-discriminatory and need-based in the projects it is undertaking in a given geographic area, in this healthcare center that this medical organization might be managing. And here I would argue, coming back to the principles of neutrality and independence, that those two principles are maybe less critical in those kind of circumstances, because one could consider an organization that is active only, let's say, in a government-held area of a country at war, that is carrying out some activities only in a hospital, in this government-controlled area, which still can be impartial in the way it delivers its services, meaning that it would provide the aid based only on the urgency and the severity of needs, and that it would take it as its duty, its responsibility, to therefore treat a rebel fighter, for instance, that would come into this particular hospital or health center. So this is what I call impartiality at the micro level. Now, let's move on to ICRC's practice of impartiality. As I mentioned before, impartiality requires being able to objectively assess needs. It needs to be need-based, and therefore, in our view, it is of paramount importance to work in proximity with affected people, to be able to listen to them, to listen to their problem, not only material problem, but problems in terms of safety, of security, somehow their aspirations as well. So what I want to say here, I guess, is that impartiality is not just about the collection of data, but it's really about establishing this human relationship with the communities we serve in order to understand their needs accurately and, as much as possible, holistically. This requires to have access to this population, which requires to be accepted by the gatekeepers, by the different stakeholders in a given context, being the authorities or religious leaders or community leaders in general, which once again shows the importance of the other principles of neutrality and independence. And I would argue that this proximity and this ability to deliver assistance and protection that is relevant to people's needs in line with the principle of impartiality is in itself a driver of accountability. If you are not in a position to deliver relevant assistance or protection to people, you might lose this acceptance and in turn not be able to deliver aid to those communities anymore. Another aspect of the ICRC's practice of impartiality is that it very much relies on the universality of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. Indeed, I would argue that our ambition within the ICRC and the broader Red Cross movement is to be impartial at the three levels that I have described before, meaning the macro level, globally, the crisis level, across front lines, to put it simply, and the micro level. And this Red Cross, Red Crescent movement and the work we do together with Red Cross and Red Crescent national societies is what enables us to have this, to act impartially at those three levels. Indeed, we are present through national societies in 189 countries, but also we work with privileged actors, those national societies that are anchored in in their local and national context, and who have a comparative advantage or an added value on us, which is this ability to accurately understand the cultural or religious sensitivities that are also so important to take into account when we talk about impartiality. And there is a great deal of complementarity between the different components of the movement in that respect, which enable us or contribute to impartial humanitarian action at the global, national, and local level. Then our understanding of impartiality is also about filling what I call the vulnerability gap. Our ambition here is also to be able to address the needs of the most vulnerable, those that are falling through the cracks of the international aid response. And in that respect, coordination with other actors is crucial for impartiality. As you all know, some actors are, some humanitarian actors or agencies have specializations in terms of the population whose needs they want to address, just like such as children, or well, we have one of the co-panelists in today's discussion is from Help Age International that specializes in addressing the needs of elderly people, and this is all very necessary because this is what enables us as a humanitarian ecosystem to address the needs, the specific needs of specifically vulnerable categories of the population in a relevant manner. However, those different actors might not be able to address the same needs, and this is where it is indeed really important to be aware of one's own limitations as an organization, and to be aware of the complementarity of other actors in achieving this global impartiality. And finally, impartiality and protection work. I think I already mentioned it before, but impartiality, in our view, is certainly not only about material assistance, about providing healthcare or providing food or shelter to those in need in a relevant manner and in a proportional manner. But it is also about protection. And here I would like to refer to a document which is called the Professional Standards for Protection Work, which was developed by the ICRC, which basically puts impartiality at the center of all protection work, even the protection work that is carried out by human rights actors, arguably even protection work that is carried out by peacekeepers when it comes to the protection of civilians within United Nations peacekeeping missions. Impartiality is therefore central, in our view, also to the protection work in general, regardless of the actor that is delivering this this protection work. Now, and we are approaching the end of this presentation, I would like to stop quickly on some of the challenges to impartiality, starting with the very rejection of the notion of humanity. This idea that people's needs should be addressed regardless of their political deeds, regardless of their religion, regardless of the side they take in a particular conflict, or even regardless of yes, what they did in the past, is not necessarily accepted by all. And as as international relations are increasingly polarized today, and this is also the very nature of every conflict to be polarized and radicalized. This notion of impartiality, of aid based on needs only, is not always shouldn't be taken as granted. And we face indeed difficulties to justify at times that we should look at the primary identity of any human being and believe in this radical equality of all human beings. Then another challenge to impartiality is financial independence or funding constraints. Indeed, the dependence of organizations, to humanitarian organizations in general, to funding from institutional donors may challenge this principle of impartiality. We have to recognize that that donors, institutional donors, have their own political priorities, and that they tend to distribute the funding according to those political priorities. A lot of donors do have some systems in place to guarantee an impartial distribution of the funding, and here I can think about the European Commission, for instance, that has a very clear system in place, or the Swiss government, or a number of other governments. But those systems are also sometimes undermined by the realpolitik, and therefore it is crucial for humanitarian organizations to maintain a degree of financial independence in order to deliver impartial aid. And this goes through negotiating with donors unearmarked funding, for instance. This is what, within the ICRC, what we really try to do in our interactions with any donor, to diversify the sources of funding. And we have the example of MSF that relies for a large majority on individual private funding, which gives it a greater independence and therefore a greater ability maybe to remain impartial, and the importance also of multi-year funding, not to be, as much as possible, not to be blocked by a funding that must be renewed year on year, but rather to be agreed like for several years in a row. Access and security constraints are obviously a huge challenge to the impartial delivery of aid. As I mentioned before, our understanding of impartiality is very much linked to the proximity we can have with affected populations in order to assess independently their needs, in order to understand what they need. And in that respect, access and security constraints are a huge obstacle to this impartial delivery of aid. It requires, in that respect, a strict application of the principles of independence and neutrality, but those principles are also challenged by the politicization of aid, either through the use of hearts and minds tactics by some of the belligerents in different conflicts. This is challenged also by stabilization or integrated approaches that bring together development, political, and security and humanitarian approaches in order to support our government or to stabilize some regions or some countries. It is challenged by counterterrorism policies, but also by the proliferation of aid and relief factors that are not all acting according to the same modalities, and tend to blur the lines between the motivations of different actors. And finally, I will address another challenge to impartiality, which is a challenge inherent to the humanitarian principles, which is how impartiality can be at times in contradiction with neutrality. Indeed, a rigid or dogmatic application of the principle of impartiality, consisting, for instance, in delivering aid to one particular community without taking into account the sensitivities of other communities around that have some needs, maybe less urgent, but that see you as an organization go through their village to bring some food or any other assistance to the neighboring community can create resentment, can create misunderstandings, which can result in in increasing tensions in between communities, which can result in the community that feels ignored, to undermine, to put obstacles on your organization and the access of your organization to the neighboring community. And therefore, what is important when in order to implement this principle of impartiality is to look at it with this neutrality lens, to understand how impartial humanitarian aid can be perceived by some organizations that, by some communities, sorry, that are not the direct beneficiaries of this aid. And last but not least, I would like to stop quickly on both the opportunities and the challenges created by new technologies. Indeed, new technologies offer opportunities to overcome access and security constraints through the use of the internet, for instance, mobile phone, that enable organizations to reach out to affected communities, even though they are not physically present due to access or security constraints. But on the other hand, we have to use these new technologies in a very sensible manner, because this might create also some gaps. We shouldn't overly rely on new technologies and realize, for instance, that some communities might be left out of those technologies, of the use of cell phone or of internet, and therefore we might create some new vulnerabilities if we put all our eggs in the same basket, so to say, and use those new technologies with a lack of sensibility. I think I have talked long enough, and it is time to conclude. And so, in conclusion, I would like to emphasize three key aspects that I hope were clear in this short presentation, which is first the fact that impartiality provides both a moral compass, but also a practical tool to humanitarian action. It is both an end, it is both a goal, and but it's also a way to deliver aid and to cope with the limitations that each organization has. Secondly, impartiality is the bottom line for humanitarian action. As I mentioned, it is recognized, it is this principle is recognized in international humanitarian law, and it is a critical aspect. It is part of the identity of humanitarian actors and what humanitarian action is. And the very bottom line is that every organization should be able to deliver impartial aid, at the very least, at the micro level that I have described before. And last but not least, it is important to keep in mind the complementarity of humanitarian actors in achieving collectively impartial humanitarian aid. Indeed, not all actors might be able to achieve impartiality at all three levels that I have described before. And this is okay, as long as the aid is non-discriminatory and needs-based. Some might have a deficit of neutrality and independence, for instance, which creates difficulties to access to the most vulnerable in all places in a given crisis, and makes them unable to deliver aid across front lines. But the importance is to avoid to claim being neutral and independent when you have limitations in that respect, to be more honest about the limitations of each actor, and to be aware of the complementarity of others in order to achieve impartiality at all three levels in a collective manner. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy now to take up any question you might have.
That was great, Jeremy. That was really great, very clear. Thank you very much. It's also interesting that you mentioned that Impartiality is 50 years old this year. I think in our humanitarian world where everything changes so quickly, that endurance says something about the importance of the principle. Before moving on to our panel discussion, I'd like to just know if there are any questions for clarification purposes. You can send them in via the link we described earlier. We've got a few already, Jeremy, and I'd like to just run these by you. You've touched on a number of things, and in particular, you were talking about the different levels at which you look at impartiality, sort of the global level, the macro level, the crisis level, and the micro level. And Reza in Jordan asks, well, does that mean that a small organization just working in one neighborhood can still claim to be impartial even if they're really not able, they don't have the capacity to work across the whole country? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. I think we must very much take into account that not all organizations have the resources, the means to achieve impartiality at the global level. Let's put it that way. In that respect, most national or local organizations would be excluded from this humanitarian sector because if they focus their activities at the national or local level, they are by definition not in a position to address needs at the global level in a kind of holistic manner and fully impartial manner at the global level. The same thing goes for, yes, for local organizations that might not have the, well, the ambition to extend our activities in the entire country. But what we would expect at the very least is that indeed at the level of their district, at the level of their neighborhood, or in the different projects and programs that they might run, that they do so without any discrimination other than the actual and objectively assessed vulnerabilities of the people they serve.
Good. Okay, thank you for that. Another question comes in from Anne in Israel, who asks, well, who decides if an organization is impartial or not? So yeah, who's the judge here, Jeremy?
Oh, that's a good question, and certainly not an easy one. Well, I guess there is not one judge, but certainly a multiplicity of judges in that respect. Certainly a lot of donors who believe in this notion of impartial humanitarian action can play the role of judge and would sanction an organization that is not impartial by simply withdrawing any funding. But there are a number of initiatives as well, sectoral initiatives within the humanitarian sector that attempt to not to judge whether an organization is impartial or not, but rather to encourage organizations who join a given initiative, and I'm thinking here about the core humanitarian standard, for instance, the CHS, to encourage them to improve their ability to deliver impartial aid by proposing a number of standards that those organizations should respect and should live up to, so I guess it is, and then overall I guess the final judge is certainly the communities that we help.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that in the end, and also the armed actors in the area. You know, I always found in my work with MSF that if they do not believe you're acting impartially, you will hear it from them very quickly. Have one more question, just for clarification, from Zacharias Asefa in Ethiopia, and you described, Jeremy, very well how you know, impartiality is a requirement for humanitarian organizations. What he's wondering is if there are ways in which the principle of impartiality is unique to the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, or are there ways in which it's particular to Red Cross, Red Crescent rather than everybody?
I would say yes and no. I guess it's a non-answer, but well, let me explain. No, probably because, as I mentioned before, this principle of impartiality, which was maybe developed or formalized or defined in the first place within the Red Cross Red Crescent movement, has been broadly embraced by all humanitarian actors. It is enshrined in international humanitarian law, as much as there are some divergences on the interpretations of the humanitarian principles in general. I'm thinking in particular about neutrality, which is certainly the most contested. I think there is a relatively large consensus on what impartiality means. But yes, there might be a particular interpretation of impartiality which is unique to the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement to some extent, which is this ambition that I mentioned before to be impartial at all three levels. And this is the greatness of this movement. This is why it was developed the way it has been developed, meaning that we're talking about three entities: the International Committee of the Red Cross, that has a specific mandate to act in situations of armed conflict; the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies that work, that support national societies, the third entity, to develop their capacities and help them to coordinate, in particular when responding to natural disasters. And then this third component, which is critical, and which are the 189 national societies of the Red Cross or the Red Crescent around the world that enable this movement to have this truly universal reach and this truly globally impartial action.
Okay, thank you for that. Maybe I've got one quick question for clarification, just came in from Solomon in Ethiopia. And in your presentation, when you were talking about the principles, you mentioned 7 principles in the Red Cross Red Crescent, and you added also voluntary action, unity, and universality. And I think we just wanted a clarification that what do you mean when you say that those belong to the RCRC? I don't think you mean you own them exclusively, do you?
I didn't mean that they belong to the ICRC, to the International Committee of the Red Cross, but to the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. I mean, this idea of voluntary service, this spirit of disinterested aid, selfless service to the others is certainly not unique to the movement. Unity, I mean, there are certainly a whole range of other actors that see that as a principle in their own organization. And here I'm not even thinking about only the humanitarian sector, but maybe in the private sector, I don't know. Universality is certainly shared by a number of factors in terms of this aspiration to the universality of values. But the way they are integrated, the way they are part of those 7 fundamental principles of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, and the way they are understood within, is very specific to the movement. And once again, unity, which I mentioned before, we understand it as one national society per country, which covers the entire territory of its country and which is open to all. So it's a very specific definition and understanding of this principle, which makes those 7 principles like a coherent lot, and where not one single principle can be used independently from the others, if you wish.
Yeah, no, I think that was a very good explanation, that there's a particular meaning assigned to it and a particular interrelationship assigned to it within the Red Cross Red Crescent movement and its interrelationship with the other principles. With that, I think we're going to try and move on towards the next part of our discussion, and that is the panel discussion. If you are taking part in this as part of your continuous learning credits, you will have to note down the assessment code on your screen now. That's 2431, and that allows you to complete these assessments later. So you're going to have to enter that code.